get into the big topic of open source, something that we actually say at Red Hat.
This is so awesome.
We are an open culture that believes in the importance of
What is that process that a developer, or let's say
as the Kubernetes ecosystem really boomed?
Hello and welcome to this week's Ask an OpenShift Admin Office Hours live stream. I am Andrew Sullivan, joined as always by my amazing and awesome co-host, Mr. Johnny Ricard. Happy Wednesday to you, sir.
Happy Wednesday to you too, man.
Yeah, it's good to be here. I feel like we've been gone for a month of Sundays, but it's only been like what, 3 weeks. We had an accidental cancel last week because it was a combination of you and I were taken by surprise, and we thought we had a topic, and then we didn't have a topic, and then we thought we had a guest, and then we didn't have a guest, and so we just decided to, rather than completely wing it, we'll just we'll cancel. So
right, somewhat professional, right? It was the right move.
Yeah. So apologies to the audience. For anybody who is exciting or waiting. It's good to be back though. And I am very happy to be joined today by one of my peers. So Mr. Ian Pilcher. Welcome to the stream, Ian.
Hey, thank you very much. I'm just here to try to live up to your high logistical standards.
Yeah, we're fancy here, right? Nothing but the, as Johnny said, right? Highest standards. So as you can tell by the topic or the title of today's stream, rather, we're going to be talking about OpenShift Virtualization, and Ian is an expert on many things and has been an expert on many things virtualization for far longer than I've known you, Ian. You've done a lot with OpenStack and like KVM and RHEL and all kinds of stuff. And OpenShift Virtualization is just the newest one in the line, if you will. So
yeah, there's a reason my head's so shiny.
I can't comment on anything. I got way more gray and Johnny's growing his beard out. He's starting to look a little bit like a mountain man there.
That's right. This is what happens when you let it go. Once you just let go of everything that looks wise. This is what you do.
So and we were chatting just a minute ago. Today I'll say we don't have a super strict, like normally, we'll go through and we'll create an outline of all the things we want to talk about and show. And I know Ian has a few things he wants to show, but really for the audience, like Ian's super technical. And again, let's go in the weeds. Like, let's see what's happening underneath the covers. I don't want to challenge anybody. What's that? Stump the chump, right? I don't want to play stump the chump necessarily, but it's been a while since we've talked about OpenShift virtualization, and without wanting or trying to incur the wrath, so to speak, there's a lot of noise going on in the virtualization world these days. So let's have a conversation. Let's look at a few things that are going around, and to the audience, feel free to ask questions at any time. Speaking of which, so it has been a few weeks, and I feel like I often forget to do this reminder of this is an office hours live stream. So what that means is that we are here to answer questions about anything and everything OpenShift related, if I could talk, that's on your mind. So yes, today we have Ian with us. We're talking about OpenShift virtualization, but don't let that limit the questions that you want to ask about. So anything that's on your mind, any questions, problems, issues, concerns, valid or invalid that you may have, we're happy to talk about those. Quay 3.8 got released. Thank you, Hope 9. I think that's in our top of mind topics to talk about in just a moment. Again, keep those questions flowing in. We love to chat. We love to hear from everybody. So, and with that, we will roll into top of mind and go from there. So, Johnny, honestly, I just glanced at the list. I remember I was throwing things at you in Slack this morning, but I don't remember what all of them were. Yeah,
I think it was Quay 3.8, right? I mean, so Quay 3.8, I think released yesterday or at least this week, and it looks like there's a lot of exciting things that that are going to be coming out with it. Like there's a new UI, there's going to be some added restrictions, or not, I shouldn't say restrictions, but added capabilities to create restrictions within Quay, and then better container image management. So I think that the one thing that kind of caught my attention was that the storage size is going to go from base 2 to base 10, or maybe I might have that inverse. It might be base 10 to base 2. It's going to go from megabytes to megabytes. Yeah, so 2 to 10. And so it'll make that, like when you're looking at your image sizes, it'll make it look a little bit more normal, I guess is one way to put it. But then, so like when you're looking at like your existing Quay and then like this upcoming Quay, that you might see some differences there because that base of the storage is going to change.
Seems like a weird direction to go, going from 2 to 10.
Yeah, because I thought everything was in like the MIBI and Gibby and whatever the petabyte one is. MIBI bytes, Gibby bytes.
Storage is often quoted in the base 10 stuff. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, the marketing people do anyways.
And we all know storage guys are mean, so.
Yeah, I can vouch for that. I was a storage guy for like a decade. We're the grumpiest people in the data center for a reason, right?
You and the DBAs, yeah.
Yeah. So actually, I used to have a whole, I used to work for a storage vendor. I had a whole rant about this of like the reason why storage people are so grumpy is because of virtualization people. And the logic being, way back when, so think 2008, 2010, like almost overnight, because of the global recession, storage arrays in the data center went from just hosting application data to hosting every IOP of every server in the entire, enterprise. And so they were woefully undersized to take on, what in many cases were thousands or tens of thousands of VMs. So every performance problem for years, it was a result of storage just being undersized. And then, storage companies got smart and started doing things like hybrid storage, flash accelerated disk and eventually flash. But yeah, it went from, it was for years and years and years, it was always the network's guy's fault, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, why isn't this working? Oh, there was a blip. Oh yeah, we rebooted this router. The packets will just flow around. It's fine. And then it was briefly the virtualization team's fault, and then it was the storage team's fault. So anyways, many fond memories of having those conversations. Johnny, as many folks know, Johnny and I used to work together. We probably, I would not be surprised if you and I had that argument with each other at one point, Johnny.
I'm sure.
So yeah, interesting change. I honestly haven't looked at what all's going on inside of Quay. With this most recent release, I will be completely honest. I have fallen a little bit behind on keeping up with those things. As both of you know, I got tasked with doing a big project for IBM, so I was basically in a hole, isolating from the rest of the world for about a month until we got through all that other stuff. So I need to.
COVID.
What's that?
It's a professional COVID.
Yeah. Well, but yeah, I'm glad that's done now. So now we're just getting ready for the holiday season and all that other stuff. Let's see. Moving on. ACS 373 was released. This is another one I will admit that I have not kept up with. Johnny, I don't know if you can speak to that.
No, the one thing that you called out was the migration from the internal database into a more public, or what's a consumer grade database, right? I can't remember what it's. I don't know if it's going from
RocksDB.
RocksDB, yeah.
I was looking through the release notes, and it said it was going from the proprietary RocksDB. I had no idea that there was a custom database being used inside of that thing. That's news to me. I'm happy to see we're moving away from it. I will say, sort of word of warning to folks. So if you're using ACS today, when you go to 373, I think Postgres becomes optional, but for the next version, it's required. So you want to make that transition before you go to the next version. And I also want to say that the managed service side of things is already using Postgres. So there's that as well. Our Hope 9, is that because Quay will now be able to set quotas per repo? I don't know. I hope so. That would be good if we can.
Yeah, that's one of the that's one of the new features that are coming out in 3.8 is that you can set it. You're going to be able to set it per repository. There's some more stuff with like the super user where like now the super user doesn't have to own the actual repository, where there's actual RBAC built in, and it looks like it's a lot more streamlined now than what it's been in previous releases.
Yeah, I know that the Quay team has put a lot of work into modernizing their code base. Some folks may remember it's been like 6 months ago. They had like a full day outage on Quay.io as they flipped the code base to the new one. And there's been a lot of improvements since then. Manish, apologies for butchering names. Does this mean we can use OpenShift for creating virtualized environments and virtual machines? If true, can we replace VMware vSphere? So we will talk about that here in just a moment. So the short version is yes but no, or no but yes maybe.
Or no but yes, depending on how you want to look at it.
Yeah. So yes, absolutely. OpenShift can deploy virtual machines, but it is not. We do not recommend it as a vSphere replacement for a number of different reasons.
Okay, let me give you my version of it. OpenShift virtualization is not a direct replacement for VMware. OpenShift virtualization can replace VMware. And you have to stay tuned to hear me explain why that actually makes sense.
So yeah, thank you for the teaser, Ian.
Marketing.
And yeah, Matryoshka VMs. Yep, it's nesting dolls all the way down, turtles all the way down. Let's see, what else is in our list here? KubeCon Sessions. Oh, this is a good one. So the Alex over at the blog site, I'm going to post this link into the chat here. So Alex Handy, who runs the cloud.redhat.com blog, collected all of the KubeCon sessions that Red Hatters participated in and put a link up there to all of them. So if you're interested in any of the stuff that we had going on at KubeCon, in addition to, the booth and all the press releases and everything else, I think it was like dozens of press releases that week. It was quite the media blitz. But if you're interested in the actual technical stuff, all of the real reason why people go to KubeCon, that links to all the stuff that we did there. So it's a good blog post. I've perused through a couple of them so far, and as you would expect from KubeCon, they're always really good about selecting great sessions. What's next, Johnny? I think we got say one more.
Yeah, the big one, like really the headliner is Argo CD graduated to within the CNCF it's a graduated project now, so it's the real deal. They're a real project, and they're official as Christian put it. So congratulations to the Argo CD team, and that's good news for us with OpenShift GitOps, and it's just, OpenShift GitOps as an operator and as a product within Red Hat and OpenShift is just going to grow and get better and better. And 2023 has got a lot of good things on the roadmap, so I'm really excited to see what they're able to get done.
Yeah. Who knew GitOps would be a thing and would be so popular? Oh right, a lot of folks like Christian.
Christian knew, yeah.
It's I'm really happy to see that it graduated. I think it reinforces the popularity and the power behind Argo and the GitOps mentality and philosophy. Case in point, we have a peer live stream that's focused on GitOps.
Mm-hmm.
Johnny, basically your full-time job is GitOps. Yep. And I know you're not the only one, not only in Red Hat, but across, other parts of the industry. So it's a great tool. It does a lot of really cool things. We've talked about it briefly here. I don't remember if it was the last episode or the one before that. We talked about how GitOps applies for administrators and the ways that we can use it. It's being integrated and being taken advantage of in many other ways as well. ACM, you can use application sets directly from inside of ACM, which is the Argo application definition language object, CRD. That's what I'm going with, CRD.
Resource,
yeah. So it's becoming more and more pervasive. I would definitely suggest that we should all, as administrators, do at least a little bit of due diligence and make sure that we're aware of it, because more than likely your application teams are using it as well. All right. Yeah. Let's talk some OpenShift virtualization. So I think Manish has set us up a little bit here to start the conversation around OpenShift virtualization. So I know, and Ian, I have no idea what you have to demo or what you want to show or anything like that. But to Manish's question, yes, absolutely, we can deploy virtual machines. And the fun part is they're virtual machines in containers. It's still Kubernetes, it's still OpenShift. We're not bypassing that aspect of it. So please, I don't want to steal your thunder.
Right. Yeah. This is. Yeah. I mean, I think that's exactly the point. Is it's virtual machines running within OpenShift as VMs, but also as pods, and being able to use all of the technologies and operational practices that you use in an OpenShift environment and apply those to your virtualization environment. So with that, let me go ahead and share the screen here. I think we did promise these folks a live demo somewhere along the line. So hopefully that will come up here. Awesome. Awesome. So as you can see, this is the OpenShift console that we all know and love. But my OpenShift console in this case also has this virtualization menu item added. And this just shows up when you install the OpenShift virtualization operator. And that is like 3 clicks in Operator Hub to do that. So within the virtualization submenu, we get this overview tab. This will list, gives us an overview, number of VMs we got running. I got a big one here, as you can tell. Also provides metrics, although it looks like I don't have anything using any actual resources, so that's very unexciting right now. But once you have actual virtual machines running in your cluster, you will see these various metrics of CPU utilization. Let's see, memory, swap, CPU weight, throughput, IOPS, etc. We also have the virtual machines that shows you virtual machines that have been created in the cluster. So you can see here I have a single virtual machine defined in this namespace. And virtual machines, like everything else, they're namespaced. And in fact, let's just go up here and we'll see that we have this container or this pod here, what we call a Virt launcher pod. So when a virtual machine is started, we actually create a pod called the Virt launcher pod, and that is where we run the virtual machine. So the virtual machine doesn't run as some special snowflake thing. It runs as a pod, just like any other pod within your cluster.
Yeah, and I want to, maybe I'm jumping ahead here. Sorry, I'm half choking because I'm having a coughing fit. If you look in that Virt launcher pod, it's a KVM virtual machine, right?
Yeah, and we can do that. Let's be dynamic here. So if I do an OC get pod, okay. I think is it 2 dashes or 1 in the new syntax? I don't remember. All right, so there we are. There we are. All right, I knew I would get it eventually. So here we are. You see, we've got a libvirtd process running. We've got a virtlogd process running. And then there is the virtual machine itself, which is exactly what you would see, on a normal Linux box, running a KVM virtual machine.
Mm-hmm. So I assume, I don't know if the command is in the pod, but you could do like a virshell and, like a virshell list and see the VM there, just like any other.
It's there or not. Yeah, there it is.
Okay. So yeah, so it's literally, it's KVM. This is what's, it's both amazing and baffling to me at the same time, right? Because if you think about it, it makes like logical sense. What is a virtual machine? A virtual machine is a process. And like, what does a container do? A container encapsulates a process. So long as the container grants access to the resources that the process needs, it just works. It's like, it's no different than any other process. So yeah, it's always, it took me a moment when I first started working with OpenShift virtualization to really wrap my head around this concept of like, it's not doing anything really unnatural. It's just adding a layer of management around that virtual machine process.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And in fact, in a lot of ways, it's, it can be a bit of a struggle to try to present this topic because it could be one slide. It could literally say, run QEM, run QEMU KVM in a pod. Next question.
Yeah.
The reality is there are a lot of details. We expect virtual machines in traditional environments to be able to do things that we don't expect pods to be able to do in a Kubernetes environment. And we've done a lot of work to bring a lot of those capabilities to OpenShift virtualization so that as people bring workloads from those traditional environments, they're not going to lose the functionalities that they're used to. One of which, is having an administrative interface that, doesn't require you, as an example, to write 100 lines of YAML to provision a VM. So, we'll walk quickly through the wizard approach here, but I do want to look at what a running VM looks like inside the console. So let me check on, click on this one, and pretty standard stuff. You got the tabs up here giving various bits of information. Let's see. We do have a VNC console available. So if you lose network access or need to set up something, troubleshooting, etc., we do have the console available. And of course, for those Windows VMs out there, that can be a useful thing as well. Again, here we see metrics specific to how many resources that particular VM is consuming. Got some more stuff over here. I think the specific one that is of interest mostly here is, what node is this thing running on? Of course, this is OpenShift. It's Kubernetes. Everything is representable as an object, using custom resource definitions within Kubernetes. So, and that's what unlocks all the automation and other capabilities that we expect from the platform. We do have the ability, as you would expect in a virtualization environment, to define various virtual networks that we are going to attach the virtual machine to. So in this case, this virtual machine is attached to two networks. It's attached to both the pod network, which is the normal pod network that other pods within the environment are connected to. It's also got a layer 2 connection. And so that's a layer 2 connection using a virtual switch on the worker node that it's running on. So basically what I've done is I've set up a virtual switch, a Linux bridge on each of my worker nodes. And then I defined what's called the network attachment definition. Both that under here. So there's a network attachment definition, and these things are really, really simple. To create a network attachment definition, you literally give it a name, you tell it what kind of network you're going to use. In this case, we're going with the Linux bridge, and then it's just going to ask you, hey, what's the name of the bridge interface you want me to connect to? Mm-hmm. And you can optionally add in a VLAN number if you want to do that. If you don't put a VLAN in, then it just acts, as kind of a pass-through or a trunk, and anything that comes into the physical NIC is going to be available via that network attachment definition.
Yes. So, and this is one of those areas where the OpenShift host management paradigm takes over. Because if we think of something like Rev, Rev has this GUI where you can go in and sort of drag and drop. I want to take these physical adapters and bond them together, and then I want to create, VLAN bridges or bridges with VLAN tags on top of that, and then I assign my VMs to that. With OpenShift, it's not OpenShift virtualization, it's OpenShift. With OpenShift, when you want to manage those underlying network adapters, you can do it at install time, using so if you can use the live ISO, you can boot to the live ISO, configure it using an MCLI and M2E. You can, if you're doing IPI, bare metal IPI, you can put nm state, which is YAML. I think you have it up on screen right now. So you can put like nm state directly in the install config. And depending on which interfaces, you can also do it day 2, which is the NNCP you're looking at now.
Right, exactly. This was done day 2. And the only thing you can't do day 2 is mess around with the physical interface that your pod network is running on, for reasons that are probably relatively obvious.
I won't say I've never broken management interfaces on other virtualization hosts. That never happens.
Yeah, exactly. Well, everybody's got to learn that lesson the hard way, right? So yeah, this is what we call a node network configuration policy, which really rolls off the tongue. But this is all it took for me to create that bridge on all of my worker nodes, and attach it to the physical interface. So define the physical interface that it's attached to. I've given the bridge its name. I told it, no, don't run DHCP on this. Basically don't use IPv4. That's it. Really, really quite straightforward. I mean, the only thing that people are coming from legacy type virtualization environments are, again, coming from say a Rev, they're not, that GUI isn't there in the console because we don't really do host management in the console.
Yeah, and one thing I noticed there is you don't have VLANs defined there, because the VLANs are defined. I guess you can define them there, but somebody in the NM State engineering team once told me that they suggest that you create VLANs with the network attachment definition, not with Linux bridges themselves.
If nothing else, if you were doing the VLANs at NM State, and in NM State, just to be clear, the NM stands for Network Manager.
Yeah.
So NM State is literally configuring Network Manager. So you can do basically everything through NM State that Network Manager can do, and you can't do things that Network Manager can't do. So if you wanted to create an interface on a host that was VLAN tagged, that's NM State. If you want to trunk a bunch of VLANs into a host and then allow at a higher level, allow sort of the virtualization users to say, hey, I want to connect this VM to this VLAN, then yeah, you would do it through the network attachment definitions in that case.
Yeah.
Let's see.
And one
right.
interesting thing is that the network attachment definitions, along with the VMs themselves, are namespaced.
Yes.
So you can control who has access to what in that way as well.
Right. Network attachment definitions, I believe, can be created at a cluster-wide level as well. So you've got the option there, I believe, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
But yes, they are. Whereas obviously anything done on host configuration that's the host configuration. That's not namespace.
Yeah.
All right. So back to our VM. Network interfaces. You can attach disks, detach disks, etc. We can take snapshots of the disks. So you can see we've got kind of what you'd expect from a virtualization console in terms of creating and managing a virtual machine. The one thing that is frequently asked about is whether we have live migration capability in OpenShift virtualization, which is, for anyone who isn't familiar with it, it's basically what we call our version of vMotion in this case. The answer is yes, we do. And in fact, Red Hat has, to my knowledge, never shipped a virtualization product that did not have that capability. That's, we recognize that is kind of table stakes, if you will, to do virtualization. But it's kind of interesting. We've got this Virt launcher pod, right, which we just looked at. And we know that in Kubernetes, you can't live migrate a pod. Mm-hmm. So let's look at how this works. This is one of kind of the cool hacks, if you will, that we've done. So
yeah. I'm glad you're looking at this, because this is like, I love the way that we solved this problem, because once you see how it works, it just makes sense.
Oh, let's see. Yes, pod. Okay, so what we see here is my Virt launcher pod is running right now on OCP4 worker 2. So let's live migrate it. We can initiate that from the console. Migrate to a different node. And what we see here is we are creating a new Virt launcher pod for that VM over on a different host. And so what we do is we spin up a new Virt launcher pod. It's running libvirtd, and then the operator tells those two libvirtd instances to migrate the virtual machine from one to the other. And eventually that should complete. And then this existing one on the previous node should go into a completed state.
Yeah, it's beautiful in its simplicity, right? Because it's literally, I'm going to schedule a second pod, and then I'm going to use the native QEMU libvirt mechanism to live migrate the VM from within those two things. Like, we didn't have to do anything special or extra inside of OpenShift or Kubernetes in order to, you can't live migrate a container, you can't live migrate a pod, but we can schedule a second one, and we can migrate whatever's going on inside of there to a different host. It's just,
yes. So the answer is the live migration slide that I want to create is just one sentence, big red text. Yes, we do it. Stop asking.
Yeah. Fahad asks, and again, apologies for butchering names. So no OpenShift virtualization only runs on bare metal nodes. Can those be added to a pre-existing IPI vSphere cluster?
And the answer to that is yes. If you've got a bare metal cluster and You go into the operator hub, search for virtualization. The OpenShift virtualization operator will show up there. It's part of OpenShift virtualization. It's not a separate product.
You wouldn't be able to add bare metal nodes to an IPI cluster, though,
Oh,
right?
well, if they're okay, I was assuming a bare metal IPI cluster, and you wanted to add OpenShift virtualization to it.
I think, and Fahad, please correct me if I'm wrong. I think they deployed a cluster to VSphere using IPI. So it's a VSphere IPI cluster. Can you then add bare metal nodes to that VSphere IPI cluster?
That is definitely a different question.
Yeah.
And the answer to that one is no.
Yeah. You can't mix cloud providers or a cloud provider and no cloud provider. So the vSphere cloud provider requires the node to be, well, a VMware virtual machine. And bare metal would not qualify as that. And that's an upstream, that's a Kubernetes limitation. I've got the link for it here somewhere. I've had this bookmark for like 3 years now.
So hopefully that answered your question, Fahad, regardless of which question it was. Okay. All right. So we've got that. Now there is a subtlety to all of this wonderful stuff that I wanted to point out, and that is to do with the pod networking. So let me go back. Let's see.
While you're typing, Sammy, I'm not sure I understand your question. Is migration supported between two nodes? So a virtual machine can only run in one place at a time. So you couldn't migrate or like go from one instance to two instances running somewhere. So
you also can only live migrate between nodes within the same cluster. Sometimes we get asked whether we have some sort of cross-cluster live migration, and just like every other virtualization provider in the universe, we do not.
Yeah, I think that was really more the question. I think he was, or I think that Simba was asking, like, yeah, okay, there you go. Yep.
Yeah, between two clusters. Yeah, no.
Awesome.
One thing, while we're on the subject, one thing I thought was interesting is the live migration. It's just a YAML object. You can trigger a live migration from the CLI just by creating a YAML object. I don't remember the CRD name. It's like, virtual machine live migration or something is the name of it.
Yeah, and in fact, I mean, I like to use the console for demo stuff, but it's OpenShift. Everything that we do in the console can be done via the API, just by definition. So that's an important point. So here we're back in our Vert Launcher pod now, and I wanted to look at the networking. Let's see. I don't think I have. Hopefully I have that. Do I have like ifconfig in here? No. All right. So let me find what you'll see here. Now, the important point is we know the VM is attached to the pod network. The pod is also attached to the pod network. The VM is running in the pod. The pod has a single IP. If we go into the console, go look at the pod, it'll show us the pod IP. The pod IP, that looks like the pod IP right there. So the pod IP it lives, if you will, in the Vert Launcher pod. It does not live in the VM. All right, so let me go into my fancy schmancy console here for this virtual machine. Let's look at the network configuration as seen from inside the virtual machine. There we go. All right. So you can see here that it's got a couple of them. So the ETH1 that we see there with that 192, 168, 123, that's the layer 2 network that it's connected to, the secondary network. So ETH0 is the pod network. And what you'll see in every VM here, every VM running in OpenShift Virtualization, is that it'll get the same ETH0 IP. It'll get that 10.0.22 And if I look at the default route, its default route is through 10.0.2.1. And it shouldn't be a shock to see that 10.0.2.1 is there in the Vert Launcher pod. So what we're doing to get around the fact that we need two entities, the pod and the VM, both connected to the pod network through a single IP address, is we're using network address translation, just like you use at home to attach multiple things behind a single IP address. So do be aware of that. Let's see, what else did I want to show? I wanted to show a quick run through of creating a new virtual machine. I don't think I'll actually spin one up, but I did want to show what this looks like. Select which template you want to use. Generally, you'll want to customize it somehow. Let's see, this is where I like to set a password to something that I actually know so I can access the console. One thing I do love about this is that it tells you what the username is, because I always forget that with all these different operating systems.
It's really nice in the console view too for the VM, where it shows you the credentials if you use cloud in it.
Yes. All right. So and
then
if you
guest too during demos, so
if you go on to this, this screen, this is where you have the opportunity to say add or delete additional network interfaces on different networks. I should note that in addition to the bridged or vSwitch based layer 2 access, we do also support SRIOV with this. So if you got those very high performance workloads, then you can use SRIOV with that. You just know you do not have to attach a VM to the pod network. We certainly think you're going to want to in most cases, but you're not actually required to do so. You can delete it here. Virtual machine will start up just fine. All right, so let's cancel that. Okay. That's not what I wanted to do. All right. Anyway, you also have the opportunity from that screen to add additional disks and such. So doing the basic customization that you'd expect, change the number of CPUs, change the amount of memory, etc. One nice thing, you see this source available flag here for operating systems for which we can do this. We automatically download the images for all of those operating systems, so you don't have to go out and manually download those. You can also turn that off if you want. If you don't want your users to be using the stock ones from Red Hat and restrict what they want to have access to.
Yeah.
So Ian,
go ahead, Jimmy.
Yeah, I was just going to say, if you're doing this in a disconnected environment, is that like when you're pulling down the operator, is that part of that operator pull down, or is this like a separate step that you would do outside of like an OC mirror and then just pull down OpenShift Virtualization?
OC mirror should bring it down. So
okay,
it should be available to you.
Okay, cool.
I'd like to hear if that's not the case. I don't think it is. Let's see. We also have this very long list of pre-populated templates, which, as you can see, are not in my default namespace. But you can see, so you've got basically all the operating systems with various size variants of them, and of course you can customize all of those. One thing that I should probably also show. Wrong. Create from catalog. Fine. Where do I set this? In the customize. Okay, so you can change the source that the virtual machine pulls its initial disk image from. So of course you can use the default that is specified in the template, but you also have, as you can see, a bunch of other options. So you can just simply clone an existing PVC. You can pull an image from an image registry. Basically, we can take like a QCal essentially and wrap it up in a cloud or container image, if you will, OCI image. That's the word I'm looking for. And you can put that in an image registry, access it from there. You just pull it from any old HTTPS URL. You can upload it from your local system through the browser. Never tried that one, don't know why you'd want to, but you can do it. So you've got a lot of options there. And what I think is potentially quite interesting is his ability to use an image registry, because again, we talk about these are pods, these are Kubernetes workloads, and we shouldn't have to care whether a given thing is a container or a virtual machine. We should be able to use the same processes and such with that. And so one of the things we should be able to do is use the same processes to update and manage the set of images that we use to provision these things. And so, one thing that, you can do that we've got people working on and is use Tecton, OpenShift pipelines to build, test, update your virtual machine images, just as you might do for container images. Those can then be stuck into the registry and used from there. So again, you can use exactly the same processes that you use on the containerized workload side that you do use those on the virtualization side.
And I want to poke at that for a minute, right? Because so with libvirt, with a KVM based virtual machine, right? A disk is more or less just a file. I mean, yes, we can pass through a block device and stuff like that. But so a disk is more or less just a file. So when you say you're using a container image, a registry to store those disks, effectively it is literally a container image, right? You when you want to store one, you create a new, container file or Docker file, and you say from scratch, and then you add in the QCal or the raw disk file that is that template image to that container image. You build the container image, you push it to a registry. And what happens when you use that source disk, if you want a persistent virtual machine, it basically pulls that container image in and it copies the disk into a PVC. And then that's how it runs. You can have an ephemeral virtual machine, where when you turn it off, it just like any other container, any other pod, it removes that disk and everything is reset. But that's why, the technologies, the terminology sometimes misaligns and it makes it more confusing than it actually is.
Yeah, absolutely. I didn't really go much into storage, but the way we do storage, as Andrew said, is that for every persistent VM, which is most of them these days, we just do a PVC. So it's whatever your cluster is set up to use, as far as storage, whatever CSIs you're using to provide storage to your containers, that's what Kubernetes is that's what OpenShift Virtualization is going to use. And you can tell it what storage class you want to use, and it'll just do it. You generally you want block RWX for virtual machines. RWX, you need the RWX in order to do the live migration.
Yeah. And a lot of people may pause when you say, wait, you can't do RWX with block PVCs. So actually you can. The vast majority of storage providers do support RWX with block. The key is you have to use a block mode PVC, not a file system mode PVC. So file system mode is exactly what it sounds like. So say it's an iSCSI, volume or an iSCSI PVC using file system mode. Essentially, the CSI provisioner will mount that storage device and then format it with a file system, ext or XFS or Btrfs or whatever you tell it to format it with. That will still work. You can still use that with OpenShift virtualization, but it's a read write once with basically every storage provider that I'm aware of at that point. So block mode, it mounts the storage device, so it's underneath dev whatever, and then it passes that device directly into the pod. And so I alluded to this before of like with QEMU with libvirt, you can just attach a device on the host into the virtual machine. That's literally what it does. It doesn't care what's going on in there, or it doesn't have any awareness, I should say, of what's going on inside of there. QEMU is doing its thing with it. And that will allow it, basically, libvirt and QEMU manage so that only one host at a time during the live migration process is accessing that block device, so that it doesn't have any risk of corruption. And quite literally, this is exactly how it works with RHEL. If you've got two RHEL hosts and you're running, using Virtual Machine Manager, if you want to go way back to the basics and you want to take a VM and go from one to the other, you just mount that device on both sides and tell it live migrate, and it'll move the state of that VM from one to the other. And it works exactly the same. So I always thought that was super interesting. Many of these principles are the same thing. If you're familiar with RHEL virtualization or Rev or OpenStack, it's just the same thing. It's just abstracted using Kubernetes mechanisms. Every time I dig in, every time I learn something new about it, I'm always surprised at how straightforward it is once you get down to it.
Yeah, that's the funny thing. It's like simplicity wrapped in complexity or something. I don't know, or something like that. So we're getting short on time here. So I did want to show this in the same vein, and this goes back to the question that Manish asked very early on about replacing VMware or another traditional virtualization environment with OpenShift virtualization. And as I kind of said, yes, it can do it. For 90 something% of virtual machines in the world, we can run it. If it can run in KVM, we can run it in OpenShift virtualization. That said, this is not a direct replacement. OpenShift virtualization and its upstream KubeVirt project from which it's derived, are all about bringing virtual machines as first-class citizens into Kubernetes or into OpenShift. They are not about making Kubernetes or OpenShift work like a traditional virtualization environment. So you get the power that you get with Kubernetes. You get GitOps, as I've shown here, where I've deployed a couple of virtual machines based on the contents of a Git repository that defines them. You can use Tecton to build your images. We didn't really show it, but you can, once you've got your virtual machines in there connected to the pod network, you can expose them as services, as node ports if you want, through load balancers, through routes, etc. You can use service mesh to do blue-green testing, to do network tracing. So you can do all this stuff, all this cool stuff that you can do in the OpenShift Kubernetes space. But it is a transition. It's not the same as using those older technologies.
Hey, Ian, what's a use case where, and this isn't meant to put you on the spot, but like what's a use case where OpenShift virtualization doesn't fit? Like what VM use case wouldn't fit on this?
So there's, well, we don't do fault tolerance. VMware has a fault tolerance feature that literally replicates in real time the state of a virtual machine from one host to another. So that if one of those hosts dies, it's basically seamless, or as close as you can get to seamless. That has a lot of performance implications. Obviously, you'd only do that for really, really super critical stuff. My understanding has always been that that's not widely used. But that, as far as I know, is a unique feature to them. We don't have it in any. No one else has that, as far as I know. There's support considerations, to my knowledge. You got like your SAPs and such out there that get very, very twitchy about what they will support. So, as we've talked about and shown, these virtual machines in OpenShift virtualization are using the exact same kernel, KVM, QEMU, libvirt as we use on RHEL, that we use in OpenStack, that we use in Red Hat virtualization. But an ISV can still decide that they don't want to support it because it's Tuesday or something like that. But it's much more. It's really much more about. It's very rarely about what's running in the VM. It's about how you, Mr. Administrator, want to manage your fleet of VMs. Do you want to continue to use your lovingly crafted Ansible playbooks, that you've written over the years to deploy and update and stuff things, or do you want to use the same technologies and operations that you're using in the OpenShift/Kubernetes space to manage your more modern workloads?
Gotcha. Thank you. Yeah, I think that this is awesome. I'm glad you showed the Argo aspect of this, because I think that, like, as image builder gets more, more notoriety, people are using it more and more. I think things like OpenShift pipelines and Tecton, and then like that whole, CI/CD pipeline to now I can build my images and I can deploy them and test them all in cluster, and then I can go through a promotion process using GitOps, and I think that this is awesome. I'm really glad that you showed this, so thank you.
Yeah.
Very welcome.
Yeah, and Ian, I know you have to drop here in just a minute. So Johnny and I we'll stay on. We'll keep answering questions and chatting with folks. So we'll be here for at least a few more minutes. But I wanted to take the opportunity as the clock ticks over. Thank you, Ian. Really appreciate you coming on, showing all this to us. It's been great to get an in-depth look at this. Like I said, I love how it feels so foreign and complex on top, but when you look underneath the covers, it's just KVM. It's the
Business
same
as usual.
KVM that we've been doing for the last 15 years,
Yeah.
right?
It's just KVM at the bottom, and it's just OpenShift and pods on the top.
Yeah.
And there's a bit of magic in between.
Yep.
All right, I do have to drop. Thanks, guys. Really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Ian.
All right. Well.
All right. There we go.
That's
good
awesome,
to see you
man.
again. Good to see you full size again, Johnny.
Yeah, I know. You too.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because I've been doing virtualization for I don't know. I think 2007 was the first time I started with virtualization, like really, meaningful professional career of virtualization back in the days of ESX 3.0. And like I've used vSphere, I've used Rev, I've used OpenStack. I've experimented with, I've done quite a bit of toying with OpenShift virtualization and getting familiar with it and understanding how it works. And it's really this. It is a change in the control plane, in the same way that Rev versus or Virtual Machine Manager on RHEL versus, or now Cockpit, I guess, versus Rev and the Rev Manager versus OpenStack and Horizon, if I'm remembering the project correctly.
Yeah, for the UI,
Uh,
yeah.
they all provide this sort of abstraction and control plane type of thing of, in Rev, I go in Rev Manager and I click the button that says new virtual machine, and it pops up this form, and it's, what do you want to name the VM, and what, do you want to create a disk, and what network do you want to connect it to, and all these other things. And at the end, when I click create, it more or less creates an entry in a database, right? And when I say start that VM, it uses whatever logic it has and says, I choose host 3. Host 3, here is a XML libvirt virtual machine definition. Go start it. And,
Mhm.
Essentially it's the disk is in a data store that's already attached, and the network that it's going to connect to is a network that already exists, and all of those things. OpenShift virtualization is more or less the same. When you create that virtual machine, it's not creating an entry in a database. It's creating a YAML definition that ultimately gets stored in etcd, which etcd folks will be quick to remind me it's not a database, it's a key value store. Um, and when you say start this virtual machine, it's scheduling a pod, right? Like Ian showed, it's the Virt launcher pod. It says
Mhm.
start this pod and mount this, mount this PVC or these PVCs, because that's where the disk is. Connect it to this Multis network because that's how it's going to connect to the world, or the OpenShift SDN. So to me, it's really interesting that fundamentally they're the same, just the implementation is, it looks, feels, tastes, smells different.
Yeah. Well,
So
it's kind of like that whole thing with Kubernetes in general, right? Like the way that we handle applications, the way that we like
yeah,
access them, the way that we deploy them and manage them. It's the same thing now with just now virtual machines, right? Like where before we'd give it an IP and we'd go directly to that IP, where now we use a route. And yeah, like you said, like we use a pod to configure that front end for it. And yeah,
yeah,
it's awesome. It
yeah,
really is.
yeah. When I talk to people, or when I talk to, anybody, whether it's somebody internal, somebody external, about OpenShift virtualization, the question always gets asked, oh, can it replace vSphere, or Rev or OpenStack or any of them really? And the question is always, well, maybe. It entirely depends on what you're doing with those VMs, and it's, if you felt comfortable going from, say, Rev to OpenStack or OpenStack to vSphere or something like that, it's a paradigm shift in how you do virtualization management. Then, in theory, you could replace it. There are other things that are different about it, right? For a long time, OpenStack didn't support live migration. Um,
Hmm.
I feel like a long time is a little unfair now, because it's probably been longer now that it's supported it than it didn't support it before. But there was like years, like 4 or 5 years at the beginning of OpenStack's lifecycle, where it didn't support live migration. And so, there are different capabilities, as Ian pointed out, like fault tolerance isn't a thing.
Hmm.
I think the way that virtual machine restarts work, or HA, is within the constraints, within the paradigm of Kubernetes. So we have to, and I think we've talked about this on the stream before, poison pill operator.
Yep.
You have to have something that effectively fences the host and ensures that the disk is disconnected, because you don't want it to be mounted, oh, it's just a network partition. It's still there. It's still running. It's just the management plane can't talk to each other. So I don't want to start a new VM that's using the same disk, because now I'll corrupt it. So again, Rev and OpenStack have had these concepts for years. You still have to have those mechanisms in place, but it's just KVM. I don't know. I always thought that was really interesting. Again, just the simplicity of it. Once you get, just scratch, lift the covers up one level.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, exactly. Like, you just look underneath it and you're like, okay, I'm comfortable with this. I know what these are. I think like the I'm glad he showed it too, was like the way that the launcher pod manages the SDN IP, and then you get into the actual virtual machine and you can see your
yeah,
KVM network, and then you can see like the address that's communicating back into that pod, back into the cluster. I mean, I think that that's unique. And I
yeah,
definitely, like, if you're trying to like come into it cold, it's probably gonna be like, how in the heck is this happening? What is going on? But that like seeing that like that workflow, it makes a lot of sense now, and I did want to chime in on something that rhope9 said about VDO. So VDO is like it's like compression.
Yeah, it took me a
I'm
minute to
really
like.
butchering.
I was looking at that acronym, like that seems so familiar, and I kept wanting to put like VMware data something, but no, it's the rel. It was a rel. It was an acquisition that Red Hat did,
Yeah.
and it was layered on top of usually LVM, and it would do things like data compression, data deduplication
Yep.
as data was being written. I used it in my lab for a while. Now that I think about it,
Yeah.
and I had I was a glutton for punishment. I was using like manually configuring the iSCSI target initiate
Oh
so
yeah.
to present VD LUNs, which are basically files hosted on a VDO object out to my lab hosts. Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah. I'm only familiar with it because I used it with OpenStack back like 4 years ago, I think. So three or four,
Yeah.
4 years ago. So I don't know, at some point in the past. And I don't know if the volume group operator, I think KVM supports it. There's no doubt about that. But I think that how you'd get it to work within the cluster, like because with the volume group operator or the local storage operator, or the ODF local storage, I'm just not sure how you could get it to work. Maybe you can. I'm not sure.
I don't.
But no, it's a good question, I hope.
I don't think you can use it directly,
Hmm.
because there's no CSI provisioner, right? So there's no CSI provisioner that you can point to. Here's a rel host that's running VDO that I can carve up and use for iSCSI LUNs or NFS exports. There's no CSI provisioner that works with that I know of. If you were to run it on the local host, so let's assume that I could get LVM and VDO running on like a single node OpenShift instance. You could use the local storage operator to carve that up and use virtual machine disks then. Um, but that's a big if. I don't know if
Hmm.
VDO would run in CoreOS. I doubt it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
That's where I was like, I'm not 100% sure, but
yeah,
it definitely KVM supports it.
yeah.
No doubt about that. Yeah.
Chandler, not sure if Ian mentioned it, but big OpenShift win is that can use services and connect with them. Yeah. So that's one of those things where a VM, an OpenShift virtualization virtual machine, can connect to the OpenShift SDN, or it can connect to directly to an outside L2 network, right? A VLAN network, just like any other VM that we've used for the last, how long has there been virtualization? 30 years now. So it can work either way. Or it can do both, right? I can have a VM that has one interface that's on the SDN and 10 interfaces that are connected to different VLANs if I so choose. So for that interface that's on the SDN, remember it's just a pod. So I can create a service that points to that virtual machine, and then other pods can access it using that um, abstraction. I can create a route to expose an application that's running in that VM just exactly the same. To me, that's a huge win for migration or modernization stuff. So, hey, I'm running my, I don't know, 3-tier web application, and today I'm going to take, I feel like I'm dating myself here. Like, I'm running like Apache in a virtual machine, and I'm going to import that virtual machine directly into OpenShift today. I'm going to put a service in front of it and it can do its thing. Tomorrow, I go and I create a containerized version of that. I can deploy them side by side, and I can use my service or even the service mesh, because virtual machines can also connect to the service mesh, and I can direct traffic to both of those. And then I can say, okay, my pod, my containerized version, it's working great. It's awesome. I'm just going to turn off the VM. And again, the service mechanism handles that, excuse me, and is able to take care of it. So I thought that was really awesome. Did Tavernier, again, apologies for butchering names. Can you suggest a DIY home server build? Getting into pen testing and whatnot, and need a roadmap for what to get. That is going to be like super highly opinionated, because it really depends on what you want to do. So pen testing, could be multiple operating systems, could be network devices, could be various appliances and all of that other stuff. So and it depends on what those are, how complex your setup and you want it to be, and all that other stuff. Somebody in so there Red Hat has a internal group that's really active. The home lab group is really active, and
Yes, it is.
somebody there pointed me to a website called Lab Gopher. Let's see, I'll post that over here in Twitch. So Lab Gopher is basically an interface to eBay, and you can use it to kind of search for and find different servers. Obviously secondhand, it's eBay, with different characteristics. So it's a good way to find hardware that potentially at a discount. All the normal caveats, etc., of purchasing secondhand servers apply. But yeah, it's you do have to be a little bit careful, because as we in the later versions now of RHEL 8, and of course RHEL 9 going forward, we've started to remove compatibility with KVM for older processors. And by older processors, I mean things that are like 2009, 2010 and earlier, like first generation Opterons and all that stuff. So keep an eye. If you really want to be if you want to guarantee compatibility, you would want to look for something that's on like the RHEL 8 hardware compatibility list or RHEL 9 hardware compatibility list. Yeah, Ask Noah also has some level 1 techs. I know they do a lot of stuff with Home Lab and all that other stuff. So yeah, there's a number of other folks that can help with that. But personally,
Steve Ovens.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just saw the name, so I was like, I know that guy.
Yeah. So me personally, I use old desktops. So I one of my hobbies is building computers. So like the gaming computer that I use and stuff like that. So I just have old versions that I repurpose into home lab machines. Just bump up the RAM and that type of stuff. So it just depends on what you're familiar with, what you're comfortable with. Other folks, I think Christian went with like a R740 or something
Yeah.
that he has running in his house. So the downside, at least for me, so my wife, who is more sensitive to noise than I am. I spent a lot of time in data centers. I'm partially deaf, so I don't hear the fan noise quite as bad. But my wife is very sensitive to the fan noise of servers. So you might also want to take that into account if your family is not is sensitive to that, as well as the cost of power.
Yeah, I've got a T440, and then I've got some Supermicro E300 8Ds. They're like the little pizza box servers, and
Yeah.
they're awesome, but they're so loud, man. Like the case on, they're loud. Like you can hear it downstairs. My wife is always yelling at me about it. So
Yeah.
this guy Sean Nelson, who's chiming in here, if you were to see behind him in his apartment, his closet is full of like hardware. Like this dude's got all kinds of crazy stuff. This dude's insane.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely don't want to understate the cost of power, though. You're in Texas. Texas has a weird power thing, and how much it costs and all that. Is like power can be, and it's not just like the direct power to run the servers, but also remember it gets turned into heat. We're literally taking two rocks, smashing them together, and sending electricity through it. It generates a lot of heat. So you have to do something with that. Oftentimes that means air conditioning. Well, now that's an additional cost, and all that other stuff. So
yeah,
I was watching some YouTube channel the other day, and they were talking about how like the heat wasn't working in the house, so instead he just stopped venting the server rack outside and was venting it into the house, and it kept it like just warm enough to be tolerable. Like,
wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, whatever works, I guess, right?
Yep. So, and one last thing on that. The other thing to keep in mind too is if you're wanting to do like VMware is very restrictive on like their hardware list. So, and that's not like a slam on VMware or anything like that, but like they generally don't support like I don't know if it's like 2 or more older models, so like the 440 is the 4th gen. So they might be on like if you're on like the 460 or something like that, mine might be out of support, but just keep that in mind if you're wanting to do VMware, that like check their compatibility list before you buy the server, because that'll be some heartburn if you buy it and you can't use it.
Yeah. So I'm trying to scroll back up through here, see if I see any other questions or anything that we might have missed. So just before we close the stream, if anybody has any other questions, if we missed anything, If there's anything that comes to mind, please don't hesitate to ask those questions now. I'll also say, and I'm realizing as I'm saying this that I didn't do this earlier in the show, for anybody who's not watching us live, I know we get quite a few folks who don't watch us live. Feel free to reach out. So you can reach out to me at andrew.sullivan@redhat.com. Love to get email from folks. We get email on a regular basis. So, anytime, reach out, ask us questions, ask for clarification, ask for resources, all that other stuff. We're happy to help as however we can. You can also reach me on social media. I'll admit that I have not been on Twitter very much lately for reasons. But I am there, and it does eventually send me emails, and I try to keep up with those. So at Practical Andrew. But Johnny and I are also on the Kubernetes Slack. So there's a OpenShift users channel on the Kubernetes Slack. We're also on Reddit. So if you go to the OpenShift subreddit, we both frequent there as well. So email andrew.sullivan@redhat.com or Johnny, JONNY @redhat.com. And whichever one of us, if you don't remember both, you can always just send it to one or the other, and we always add each other on if one of us is missing. So
we did have one question, and it was from rhope9, and it was about having a VM running in a service mesh. And I believe the answer is yes. And if Chandler is still listening, Chandler, I don't know if you know for sure. I know, I think when you were on a couple months ago, you were talking about at least building that out, where you're building out the service mesh with a VM on top of it. So I think the answer is yes.
It does work. Yep. Yeah. It does work. They added that in 4.10, I think.
Okay.
If I remember correctly. I'm a virtualization nerd, so I've been keeping up with it for a minute.
That's awesome. Yeah.
So, all right. So again, if anybody has any questions, anything that comes to mind, don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really do appreciate it. And joining us after we've been on vacation, if you will, after we've been on hiatus for a couple of weeks for the holiday. And then what was it? There was a of the last 5 weeks, or 6 weeks, including this week. I think this is our second stream, because it was like overlap with Ansible Fest, and then overlap with the what's next for OpenShift 4.12, and then the holiday, and then our botch stream, our botch topic last week. And so we'll be back next week, though. Definitely be back next week, but that next week will be the last stream of the year. And then we'll be back in January after all the holidays and everything. Yeah, I know I got a nice long road trip to kick off the holiday for me, going to a wedding down in Florida.
Oh, dang. Nice.
So yeah, not very often I get all dressed up. I've been in COVID, status for the last 3 years. Like, it's like gym clothes every day, right?
Yeah. I had to put on a button-up shirt back in August, and I was like, I still got it. Put it on, buttoned up, and I was like, oh my god, like the neck doesn't even touch. I was like, I'm in bad shape. So my tie was all the way up. It was bad.
What's that movie? Tommy Boy, where he's wearing the jacket and singing the song. Yeah.
That's right.
I feel you. Yeah.
Yes, that was me.
All right, Jill. Thank you again. We'll see you next week. Johnny, any last words?
Real quick, I'm getting the link from Chandler for the Service Mesh and OpenShift Virtualization blog. So if you're interested, check that out. We had Chandler on a little while ago. He did some awesome stuff with OpenShift Virtualization and GitOps. So I think he's on your team, Andrew. So it was cool to have him, or at least
Chandler's in engineering. He's on the integration team. So
okay.
They do lots of cool stuff where it's so engineering says, oh yeah, we're going to add compatibility for service mesh. Chandler's team are the ones who actually go out and prove that works, and then show the rest of the world how it happens. So
nice. Okay. Yeah. That's what it was. I remember now. But yeah, that's it, man. Thank you. It's good to see you again. I'm glad the IBM thing is done. And to Jamie's point, I don't have to host a show by myself anymore, and they don't have to put up with me. So I'm glad you're back, because we're a dynamic duo, not a dynamic single. So
all right. Have a great week, everyone.